All right, so let's get going on today's class. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be starting to take a look at what we're going to do with the data that we're collecting, the data that we're either running subjects to collect, or if you're doing corpus analysis, finding data out in the world to analyze. So we're going to start taking a look at statistics and data analysis, not because we necessarily have large amounts of data to analyze right now, but we definitely should start planning what we're going to be doing so that when it does come in, we're good to go. So just kind of remind us, keep focus on the fact that now as scientists, as producers of psychology, we want to make sure that we disseminate our research. A couple of things to keep in mind, the undergraduate research conference, have that as your end goal. Again, we'd like to get as many of you presenting here as possible. The deadline for that is still about a month away, so most of you are well underway, and we'll have, would basically be ready in about a week to submit an abstract. So we got a month, so just keep that in mind as we're progressing towards that. And then just to kind of also let you know, one of the end goals of this is to actually produce a research project that is good enough to be published in a psychology journal. And to that end, just because the typical turnaround for psychology journals tends to be very, very long, what I've actually done is I've founded my own journal, the Journal of Cognition and Diversity. It currently, you can either buy it on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, or it's available for free on my website here. And this is currently massively under construction. But basically, this is one of the end goals that I have for everybody's projects here, to actually have a peer-reviewed publication out there, something that you can include on a CV, something that you can link people to in graduate school applications, job applications. And just kind of give you an example of one of the articles from a previous capstone course. Caitlin Sanders was able to publish her research on the chameleon effect in autism, the link between mimicry and habituation. So again, this is one of the end goals that we're looking to do, to have you actually give back a published article in this case, so that other people can be linked to that article, sent to that website, and basically producers, not consumers. All right, so keep those in mind as we're working through the next few weeks. Remember our journey through this semester. So we started with nothing at the beginning. We're trying to get down to that published final article. And right now we're right about here where we're thinking about how we're going to do our results draft. And that's what the data analysis and statistics area that we're going to talk about today is all about, because that's what's going to go into your results section. It's your statistical analyses, it's the data that you've collected, graphs indicating what happened. So what we're going to do today is start to think about what are we going to do with the data that we're collecting. How are we going to handle it? How are we going to treat it? What are things that we need to do now that our data collection has gone live? So I'll just, to begin with, update the class on the current status of our project. So in our research community here, how are we doing so far? Spoiler alert, pretty good. And then I'll just give you a sort of list of things to do in the coming weeks to sort of prepare for that data that's coming in. So things to do, what to do with the psychology research management system, just to make sure that we're on top of that. It's now time, if you have your IRB approved and your project is up and running, it's now time to start looking into how to export data from Qualtrics if you're using that system. And then it's also time to start planning your statistics. So we definitely don't know what we're going to find at this point because it's very early in the data selection process or data collection process. But we definitely know the question that we're interested in asking for our project, and that's what leads your statistics. So we'll talk about planning your statistics as well. All right, so current status, just to be clear where everybody is. So if you're doing a corpus analysis, if you're not collecting data from subjects, you're not interacting with subjects, in that phase, for those of you that are doing a corpus analysis, the percentage of people in the data collection phase, just to be clear, is 100%. So if you're doing a corpus analysis, you should at this time be well underway in terms of collecting data, in terms of getting examples, in terms of analyzing that data in different ways. So because you didn't need to wait for IRB approval, because you weren't interacting with human subjects, you are good to go. So be sure that you are well underway in your data collection phase. In terms of the students who are working with human subjects and one animal subject, and who needed to have IRB approval for that, or not, as we found out. But anyways, for those individuals, I'm very pleased. We are at 70% completion rate, which means that 73% of the projects have now gone through the full IRB approval process. So they've come to me, they've gone to Erica, they've come back to me. The required changes have been made. So we're up to 73% of those subjects needing IRB approval have received approval. And some of those are family and friends only studies. Some of them are a combination of family, friends, and SONA, and then some are SONA only studies. So on that note, as soon as you receive word from me that your IRB has been approved by Erica, here are the final changes to be made. And then, once you make those changes, if you're recruiting family and friends, you're good to go. So just to be clear on that, once those changes are made, you can post your recruitment script to whatever social media or email outlet was in your IRB, and you're ready to collect from family and friends. For the ones that required SONA, I'm very pleased also. This was updated from the slides that I uploaded to Canvas yesterday. We were at 50% yesterday. Currently, we are at 100%. So for those of you that needed or are using the psychology subject pool and have received that final notification that yes, your study has been approved, I'm very pleased that the last one I sent to Professor Talcott literally about 10 minutes before we came in here. So she's going to activate that, and then your SONA projects will be live. Now, before we get into what to do now that your SONA projects are live, one thing that I kind of forgot to mention, I just want to make sure that everybody is aware of this. So I've been looking through the drafts. I've been looking through the peer reviews as well. I'm going to be posting grades on those really quickly. It's just that I really needed to prioritize getting the IRBs through so that we can start collecting data. But now that you've received feedback on your intro and you've received feedback on your methods section, be sure to check the files in Canvas and also the assignment tab for your peer review response summaries. So this is very much like what is required if you're submitting an article to a journal for a publication. When you submit an article to a journal, it gets reviewed by typically 3 reviewers. They send you their comments in terms of what needs to be changed, what issues need to be addressed, and then you send back the revised journal article based on their comments. The other thing, though, that you need to send back is a response to each of their comments. So what you do is you take that email that was sent to you from the editor and embedded in their feedback, you indicate what you did to address their feedback. Most of the times, if they say things like, this citation not APA style, you would go in and say changed it to this APA style. If they said things like, grammatical error here, you would literally write, fix that grammatical error on page 4, line, 15. We don't have to be that detailed, but to make sure that we're using the feedback that we're getting from our peer reviews, what I will have you do is this peer review response summary. So the first thing you want to do is just indicate the number of peer reviews that you actually received. So I'm very pleased to announce also that most of the peer reviews are being done. For those of you that are not doing that peer review, please, it's an important process. Make sure that you're doing that. You do get points for it towards your final grade, so it's vitally important both ways. But insert the number of peer reviews that you received there. And then what you'll notice is that these criteria here are the criteria that you were evaluated on in your peer review. So as you go through your peer reviews and you access that feedback, you will see, whoops, learning outcome, sorry, that shouldn't be there. All right, you will see, that's more like it. You will see this criteria. Does the submission analyze the subject to an adequate depth? Is the text rigorous enough? If not, where could it be developed? So you'll actually see that criterion, and then you will see scores from your 3 reviews. What I would like you to do is put the average score here out of 5. So you'll see somebody might give you a 4 out of 5, somebody gives you a 3 out of 5, somebody else gives you a 5 out of 5. You can either put the individual scores or the average score either way. So in this case, that would be a 4 out of 5. And then you will also see comments associated with that criteria. And what you want to do here is list all the changes that you made or your response to any of the comments there. So if, for example, does the submission offer a balanced critical view, avoiding biased or highly subjective opinion? If one of your reviewers said, oh, this paragraph here was highly subjective or used highly subjective biased language, then you would want to say edited that particular paragraph. In response, you'd want to say edited the particular paragraph to remove the biased language. Or alternatively, if you disagree, you could say, biased language is not used. Those terms are the agreed upon terms in this particular, psychology area. So whatever it is, whatever changes you have to make or response that you need to make, use this response summary to kind of indicate what you did for the peer reviews. So I've uploaded these now because it came to my attention very nicely that some of you have already begun revising your intro and your method section based on those reviews. So again, there is 2 sheets now, one for the intro, one for the method section. For students doing a corpus analysis, there are 2 other sheets, one for the methods, one for the intro section for students doing an experiment. And again, the criteria are reproduced. Those are directly from the peer review. So if you're doing an experiment and you're answering this, are the subjects described in sufficient detail? You will see your feedback. If they listed something like the gender of the subjects, no place was given to indicate the gender of the subjects, just indicate, added a sentence to, report the gender of my subjects. Question?
For the method section peer review, out of the 3 that I needed to do, I only received 1 submission. There were 2 that, even up until last night, there was only 1 submission out of the 3 that I could edit.
Okay.
So I don't know, do I have to wait until people submit to get assigned, or?
Well, you've been assigned.
Yeah.
Yeah, send me a message about that.
Okay.
Because typically, when I was looking down, that didn't seem to be an issue because I saw like 3 check marks next to everybody's peer review list. So if you've been assigned but they haven't actually been submitted, let me know, and we'll see what to do about that. Any other questions about your peer reviews and how to handle your peer reviews, what to do with them? All right, so again, make sure that you're doing this, keep track of it, and definitely make sure that you are using your feedback that you're getting from the peer reviews, because that is definitely what separates a highly regarded research journal versus not so highly regarded. So there is a big difference in terms of quality, in terms of reputation, in terms of prestige between non-peer-reviewed publications and peer-reviewed publications. Peer-reviewed are considered the top of the top in terms of quality. And the reason for that is because of the feedback that you get from your peer reviews. It just makes your, incorporating that feedback makes your drafts better. So make sure that you're using the feedback that you received and make those changes to your drafts. All right, so back to SONA. So this is this part right now is going to be for those students that are using SONA. So if you're using SONA in your project, one of the things that you want to make sure that you are doing over the next weeks while you are collecting data is you want to make sure that you are visiting regularly. I would say about once a day. The SONA Systems, IUSB This is the same site that you used to organize and put in all your information for the SONA system. But now that it's all in there, now that it's been activated, what you want to make sure that you're logging in on a regular basis. And you're going to see this little section here where it goes for your studies, view uncredited time slots. And what you want is you want that to be 0, basically at the end of every single day. So typically what I will do is I'll check this once a day and make sure that it's 0. If it's not, you click on this and it'll take you to a list of all of the students that have participated. And what you do there is you can, if you just have a few, click on whether they get credit or not. If you're doing this through Qualtrics, they get credit if they show up there. If you're doing it face-to-face, then take a look at your schedule for the day, see who came in, make sure that you're giving credit or not giving credit as it is required. And if everybody showed up, or if you have a number of people that have done it through Qualtrics, there is, right at the bottom of the page, a give everybody credit, don't give anybody credit part there to make it a little bit easier so you don't have to do so many clicks. But definitely make sure that you're checking this regularly. I would say just once a day, log in, check it, credit the people that participated, and make sure you're doing that on a regular basis. All right, so the other thing that you want to do if you're doing Qualtrics, and this is if you're doing through SONA and or Family and Friends, is that now is pretty much the time where the data collection starts to be very automatic. Especially if you're using Qualtrics, there's not much left to do at this point in time. Once you have your project up and running, it literally will take you about a minute and a half a day to give your credit to your students. So what would be a good thing to do with the rest of your time? Well, one thing to do would be to start to think about how are you going to export your data from Qualtrics. So Qualtrics is a great resource in terms of collecting data, but it does, and is a great resource in terms of exporting data, but it's not necessarily massively intuitive. So one of the things to consider, if you go to this site here, this is the actual Qualtrics site, their support site. There is an entire section on exporting response data, and I've hyperlinked the slides to it as well. So you can just go directly there. Let's bring this over here. And then what you want to do is now, not later, not when it's 24 hours before you need to submit that URC abstract, not when it's within the hour you need to send your poster to the printers. You want to start thinking about this now. Think about how you're going to be exporting your data. And then there is a massive amount of how-tos. Typically, the one that I use is I export the data and I do it to a comma-separated values Excel sheet. There's a number of different ways depending upon what you prefer, but that's the one that I use. And what you'll find export security measures, manage downloads. Where do you find your responses? What you'll find is that it gets formatted in a certain way. So one of the things you need to figure out in Qualtrics, in your data export, is how does Qualtrics label your questions? So how do you know which responses go with which questions? Now sometimes that's obvious because your questions are very specific. So it'll list the questions. Typically your export in Qualtrics will have the questions that you asked in columns and the subjects that responded in rows. That'll be your export. So make sure, one of the things to make sure in these coming weeks is that you know which columns line up to which questions in your experiment. So Qualtrics will do that in a very regular way, but it differs depending upon how you set up your experiment. So just take some time to look into that, how to export your data, which columns are corresponding to which questions, and start to become familiar with the use of exporting and how you can get your data out of Qualtrics, because there's nothing quite as frustrating as seeing that you got 60 subjects, downloading that Excel sheet, taking a look at it, and there's a whole bunch of numbers, and you think to yourself, I have no idea what this means. That's probably the stage you're going to be at for the first time. So over the next week or so, when you have a few subjects in there, download that data, take a look at it, and start to make sense of which columns go with which questions. And again, the rows in those exports are typically your subjects. All right, other things, there are a variety of export options. So data export options, again, you can find that in Qualtrics. Make sure that you are taking time to look at that as well. So once again, I hyperlinked the slide so you can start doing your research. But you can export it in a variety, whoops, that's the wrong one. You can export it in a variety of different ways. So there we go. So you can, again, export it in a variety of different ways. Let me get my mouse over here somewhere. There we go. All right, so once again, the CSV, comma separated values. I have never used the legacy exporter before, but that just kind of shows you the depth of things that you can do with Qualtrics. So data table, you can export custom edited fields, you can export filtered data, customize which columns are exported, and or the order of exported columns. So once again, start fooling around with this, start getting it kind of finalized so that you know which columns correspond to which questions, so that you know when you get a column of answers, which columns correspond to which questions as well. Other things that you can do is you can use export options here, and you can export, this is a very important one here, when you export your fields, these are basically the answers to your questions, you can use numeric values or you can use choice text. So those have different pros, they have different cons. So if you use choice text, what that means is that if you have, for example, a Likert scale, and you show a picture of somebody and you ask them, how attractive is this person? And the first option is very attractive, somewhat attractive, neutral, somewhat unattractive, very unattractive. Whatever the person clicks on, if you download all fields and you select use choice text, then in your column of responses, in your column of values, you will actually see the text that they chose. You will actually see very attractive or somewhat attractive. Whatever it was that they clicked on, that text will be in your column. That's very good if you want to know what the responses were. That's not very good if you're looking to come up with a score. So if you're looking to come up with a score, such as average attractiveness rating, then you would want to use the numeric values. And you would get Qualtrics to export directly those numeric values. Now, this is again one of those things where you might have to experiment a little bit with your Qualtrics setup because, or you can find it in their FAQs probably, but you want to figure out which ones are rated 1 and which ones are rated 5. So if you're asking for a particular image, how friendly does this person look? Very friendly, somewhat friendly, neutral, very somewhat unfriendly, very unfriendly. If they click on very friendly, is that a 1 or is that a 5? So make sure that you're exploring in Qualtrics which numerical values are being assigned if you're using that particular exporting option. And again, you want to make sure that you're doing this now because Qualtrics has a lot, you can see, a lot of different options, a lot of different, here it is, display the names of the questions you named and recorded values. Oh, okay, so this one will come in useful for a lot of you. Use internal IDs in header. So it goes with this option unchecked. Question column headers display the names of the questions as you have named them with a recoded value function of the survey tab. With this option checked, the question on column headers displays the internal IDs, which cannot be edited as assigned by Qualtrics. So you will notice that when you are building your survey, Qualtrics likes to assign robotic names to your questions, like Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. If you have internal IDs unchecked, then, if you have it checked, then only those internal IDs are going to pop up in your Excel output. So you're going to see Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. If, on the other hand, you uncheck that option, use internal IDs in header, then whatever you named your Qualtrics survey question, that's what it's going to come up as. So if you named it, demographic question number 1, gender, then in your Excel sheet, it will pop up as demographic question number 1, gender. And these are internal IDs. These are IDs that are not displayed to the subjects, but they can be used to label your questions. So once again, explore Qualtrics, explore the data output. Now's the perfect time to do it when a few subjects are rolling in. And also an excellent strategy to do, or an excellent kind of way to figure this out, is to just run yourself through your experiment. If you can't identify necessarily which responses go with which questions, or if you're a little bit confused in terms of the ordering, run yourself through your experiment. And number 1, identify yourself with either an extreme gender and or an extreme age. So we're asking for demographic information for our studies. And if you have it as open response questions, it's easy to put your gender in as something nobody would put in. And it's easy to put your age as something that nobody could possibly have that age. So whenever I run myself through my experiments to know that, to be very easy to identify which one was me when I ran, when I tested it, I will use XXX as my gender, and I will use 999 years old as my age. And it is very apparent when you're going through it, going male, female, male, female, female, male, XXX. That's me. And you can delete that row from your, that entire row from your data analysis. So that kind of allows me to identify questions if I'm not able to from the headers. So I'll go to a question and I'll give it an extreme answer, exit out of the survey, export my data, look for that extreme answer, and that can help you identify many of those questions. All right, so in terms of one last thing to also start thinking about with the data export options, one unfortunate truth of using subjects, especially online subjects, is that not all subjects are going to complete your experiment. So it's just part of the experimental process. You'll have subjects complete half of your survey. You'll have subjects complete almost none of your survey. You'll have subjects in a face-to-face environment do the entire experiment. You'll have subjects in a face-to-face environment after 10 minutes say, I'm kind of feeling uncomfortable, I want to withdraw, at which point you say, absolutely, no problem. So you will have subjects that have incomplete data. Another thing that you want to start considering is how complete does your experiment need to be for a subject to count? So, for example, there's going to be some studies where every single question has to be answered, right? For some of your studies, just the way that it was set up, you're doing, you're using a certain single specific questions, so every single question has to be answered. For other ones, you're asking the same thing maybe 10 times. Maybe you're getting a sample of 10 images, but they're all exactly kind of in the same category, and you're just asking them to rate these 10 images to get a sample of what they think of images from that particular category. So for example, if I was looking at the differences between attractiveness in males and females, I might have 20 images of males to get a sample of attractiveness for males. I might have 20 images of females to get a sample of attractiveness for females, and simply ask subjects to rate them on a 1 to 10 scale. If I find that they rated all 20 males, that's great. If I find that they've only rated 19 out of the 20 females, that is also good enough. So 19 out of the 20 females would still allow me to get an average for their perception of attractiveness for females. So what you want to do also is start thinking about, in your experiment, how much of a completion rate do you need for the questions in your experiment? Because again, sometimes you just need 100%. Nature of the experiment, you need 100% of the questions answered. Sometimes you won't need as many as 100%. And that can save you from having to delete an entire subject because they might have decided not to answer one question, where you can still get a valid score from that subject. It's just that for whatever reason, maybe there was a power outage in their house, maybe their internet died right when they were about to click that final question. So again, start thinking about how much, which questions absolutely need to be answered and which ones you can omit and still get a valid calculation from your survey. All right, any questions so far about what to be doing? Okay. All right, and then the last thing we're going to talk about today, it looks like it's going to be a bit of an early day, but the last thing we're going to talk about today is to start planning your statistics. So regardless of what your project is, this goes for experimental using family and friends, this goes for experimental using SONA, online and face-to-face, this goes for corpus analyses as well. Regardless of what your project is, you're going to have to do some statistics, and you are very likely to have to use SPSS in order to do those statistics. So SPSS, for those of you that haven't used it before, this is a specific statistical package that you have access to as IUSB students, and it's made to run statistical analyses. So Excel can get you pretty far. It can calculate means, it can calculate standard deviations. But if you want to be able to test hypotheses, you need to use a dedicated statistical package, and SPSS is the one that is very widely used. It's the one that I use myself, and it is straightforward, if not completely user-friendly. But it's another one to start thinking about what you're going to be doing for your statistics. So one of the things to start to think about as well, when you're looking at the data that you have. So if you've been doing your corpus analysis, you'll have an Excel sheet filled with data. If you've been exporting from Qualtrics, you'll have an Excel sheet full of data. If you've been doing this face-to-face, you'll have an Excel sheet full of data. One of the things you need to do is you need to take that data from Excel and you got to get it into SPSS. SPSS has very specific formatting guidelines for what it needs in terms of its data entry. So entering data into SPSS, I love this one here. This one, the link again is in the PowerPoint files. But when you put your data into SPSS, the biggest guiding factor in terms of formatting your data is this one right up here. It's the one person, one row rule. And what that means is that every single subject, when you enter their data into SPSS, we'll make it easy for the first one, every single subject gets their own row. So subject number one, all of the data from subject number one goes on to row number one. Their gender, their age, their answer to question number one, question number two, their score on this survey, their responses to this video. Whatever it is, subject number one gets row number one, and only row number one. Their data doesn't end up anywhere else. Subject number two, all of their data goes on row number two. So that's one of the main organizing factors for SPSS, that you have that one person, one row rule. And what you want to do to make life easy on yourself, and we'll talk about this next time, is you want to set up an Excel sheet first that has that one person, one rule, so that you can go straight from Excel and just import the entire sheet wholesale into SPSS. So you want to make it easy as possible on yourself to analyze this data. So that's one thing to also consider. When you're getting your data exported from Qualtrics, make sure that whatever sort of funneling down and simplifying of the data that you do, it still ends up in that one subject, one row configuration that'll be used for SPSS. Now, this one person, one row is going to work for most of you. If you're running a corpus analysis, you might be thinking to yourself, I don't have any people. What am I going to do for my analysis? Or if you're running one person, right? Maybe just one dog. Not to name names, but anyways, if you're just running one person, you might say to yourself, well, what am I going to do? Am I just going to have this one person on this one row? So typically it's this one person, one row rule. But there's this great, I found this wonderful kind of guide for organizing your data in statistical analysis in SPSS. And I uploaded this as well. This is a PDF. You can find it in Canvas. But I wanted to take a look at this one. The actual general kind of term is you have one case for one row. Now, 9 times out of 10, if you're running subjects, that means that you have one subject for one row. But if you're not doing subjects, if you're doing a corpus analysis, that means that you have one case per row. So, for example, one of the projects here is on levels of intimacy in different countries and whether or not that's going to correlate with suicide rates in those different countries. Basically, hugging makes people feel less sad, makes them feel better. So if you have a country that is very high on physical contact, where people actually have no problem just walking up to a stranger and greeting them with a hug and a kiss on both sides of the face, will those countries actually have lower levels of suicide and depression than very standoffish countries? So in that case, no subjects are being run, but we're still looking at different cases. In this case, we're looking at different countries, right? So maybe she has data for Austria, and then for Spain, and for England, and for Brazil, and for Argentina. Each of those countries would be a case. So when you're organizing your data for that project, you would want to make sure that every single country in this case, maybe like you can think of it as an organization, every single country gets their own row. So once again, when you're collecting your data, start thinking ahead in terms of that one case per one row, and see whether or not you can kind of preemptively plan that out to make your final data analysis that much simpler. So again, what constitutes a case? If you have one subject, I'll give you another example. Let's say that you have one subject, but you're looking at how they change over time. Well, then day 1 might be your first row. Day 2 might be your second row. So you're looking at different days as your different cases. It's going to differ depending upon your project. 9 times out of 10, though, each subject gets one row. But again, if you're looking at different organizations, if you're looking at different countries, if you're looking at different experimental trials for just one subject, you can put those on different rows. So think about that general term if you don't have that straight subjects per row. All right, and then this one is a little bit further down the road, but this is especially important if you're recording a bunch of data for your subject and you want to just be able to use the SPSS importer to import the whole thing. This website here, once again, the URL is embedded in the slide. This one shows you what to do by showing you what not to do. So once again, it's a great way to kind of set up your Excel sheet so that you can go to the import function for SPSS and just say import, browse for file, here's my Excel sheet, and then like magic, it pops up in your SPSS data file. All right, a few more things. You might have noticed that we are entering the phase now where we're going to be doing or start thinking about doing statistics. So if you haven't already, in preparation for this course, this would be a great time to brush up on your PSY P354 skills. So you remember you took stats at some point, hopefully you remember. Now is the time when you need to get those skills back. So I would suggest, take a look at your old notes if you still have them somewhere. Take a look at your old files, whatever you use to record your time in that course. And just to kind of point out and help you along with this, I actually do have a playlist where I post my lectures. You've seen it for this course. I do that for basically all of my courses, including my stats course. So if you don't have access to kind of any notes from your previous stats classes, you can go to this link. This is the link for the stats playlist. And you can just kind of peruse. They're basically, chapter 2, the mean, the variance, the standard deviation. Chapter 4, keys for inferential statistics. The ones you're most likely going to want to take a look at are going to be the ones where it's hypothesis testing. So some of you are going to be doing t-tests. Basically, if you have two comparisons that need to be made, somebody's in condition A or somebody's in condition B, chances are you're going to be doing a t-test. Others are going to be doing analysis of variance. If you have one variable that has 3 or more levels, or if you have two independent variables, then you're most likely going to be doing an analysis of variance. But again, it's time to start thinking about that because you can determine what you're going to need to do just from a description of your study. So now that we have our studies and they're locked in and we know the questions we're asking, you should be able to tell what your stats analysis is going to be. So now's the time, if you identify that, I need an ANOVA, now's the time to start thinking about what do I need in order to run that ANOVA? How do I interpret ANOVA's output? And again, just kind of brushing up on what you did in P354 can go a long way because again, the thing that you're going to find in this course is that right now, once you kind of start that data collection phase, it's a little bit of a less stressful time. So especially if you're doing online collection, it's kind of like just a turnkey operation. It's there, you just check it once a day, you can download your stuff. Even if you're doing face-to-face, you're not doing it every day, right? You're not, you don't have scheduled subjects every single day. So, and if you're doing a corpus analysis, then you don't have subjects scheduled anyway, so you're going to have this time. Now's the time to start thinking about these statistical questions because when we get to the end of this semester or near to the end of the semester, you'll find that the sort of workload is going to pick up again. So once we get near the end and we start analyzing our data, we're going to start putting that together into a poster session. We're going to start putting that together into a conference presentation. We're going to start putting that together into our final research paper. There's a lot of intense work that is coming up near the end of the semester. End of the semester, because of that, not the greatest time to answer questions about what stats should I be running? So take this time now and start thinking about all of these different things. So keep up to date on your psychology research management, award the credits as they come in. Start looking at how to export your data from Qualtrics. If you're using Qualtrics, get familiar with how the export works. Export your data a few times with different options just to kind of take a look at which one will work best for you. And then regardless of your project, you will be doing stats. So start planning your statistics. Start thinking about how are you going to come out with a single measure for these different categories, one subject per one rule. How are you going to format your Excel sheet for that? And start trying to make these decisions and lay a plan, lay a groundwork, so that when you get to the point where you're like, wow, data collection is done, you won't be sitting there going, now what? You'll be sitting there going, all right, let's do that ANOVA and SPSS. Where was that YouTube video I had and the notes that I made? Oh, there it is. All right, step one, what do I do? That's what you want to get to when you get to your data collection. All right, so that's what I wanted to cover for today. Are there any questions before we kind of wrap up today's class? Yeah, all right. Cool. So for those of you that are still in the IRB process, I will continue to try to turn those around as quick as I can. So keep an eye on your Canvas sheets. For everybody else who's running subjects, good hunting. I hope many people sign up and many of those complete the entire thing. And if anybody has any questions about where their projects are at or how things are going, please come by an office hour and we'll make sure that you get taken care of. Other than that, we are done for today.